Roy Callender stood on stage looking unbeatable. The judges scored him like he wasn't even there. You're about to learn why a man with one of the most complete physiques in golden era bodybuilding never became the legend he should have been, and what happened behind the scenes still shocks people who witnessed it. This isn't just another forgotten champion story. This is about Roy Callender, a bodybuilder whose muscle density, proportion, and conditioning matched anyone who ever won an Olympia title. Yet his name rarely comes up when fans talk about the greats. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand exactly what cost him his place in history, and you'll see why modern fans who discover his photos can't believe he wasn't a multi-time Mr. Olympia winner. Something always seemed to hold him back, long before the public knew why. Roy Callender didn't come from bodybuilding's typical story. Born in Barbados in 1944, he grew up in an academic family where his parents were educators and books filled the house. But at 8 years old, Roy found something that spoke louder than any textbook. He saw a muscle magazine, and the physiques inside looked like Greek statues brought to life. From that moment, iron became his obsession. As a young man, he moved to England to study law, but the classroom couldn't hold him the way London's gyms did. By 1967, he won Mr. Southeast Britain, and a year later, he claimed the Mr. United Kingdom title. Then came the NABBA Mr. Universe Amateur Contest, where Roy placed second in the medium height class 3 times, 1967, 1969, and 1971. Always second, always close, never quite breaking through. That pattern would define his entire career in ways no one could have predicted. He moved to Canada in the early 70s, won Mr. Canada, then walked away from competitive bodybuilding completely. Most thought he was done, but Roy Callender had other plans. He became a professional wrestler, working Canadian circuits as Mr. Universe, and facing fighters twice his size. He appeared in an art house film called Sweet Movie in 1974. For 3 years, bodybuilding competition existed without him. Then in 1977, everything changed. Roy contacted Jimmy Caruso, a legendary Montreal gym owner and photographer, and told him he was coming back, not just to compete, but to dominate. That year, Roy Callender swept through the sport like a man possessed, winning the Canadian championships in both his weight class and overall, claiming the IFBB Mr. International Heavyweight Division, then capturing the IFBB Mr. Universe Middleweight crown. 3 major victories. 1 comeback year. The golden era bodybuilding world suddenly had a new contender with dense muscle, crisp separation, balanced proportions, and no weak points anywhere. Fans who saw him in person couldn't believe how complete he looked. His thick chest pressed through his skin, his shoulders carved into 3 distinct heads, and his arms showed every fiber when he flexed. And his back made experienced judges lean forward in their seats. But here's what nobody tells you about Roy Callender's physique. It wasn't just good. It was mathematically balanced. Walk around any hardcore gym in the late 70s. Pull down a muscle and fitness magazine from a rack. Ask the old-timers who trained through that era, and they'll tell you the same thing. Roy Callender looked like he was designed by an engineer who understood perfect human proportion. His clavicles spread wide, creating a frame that tapered down to a tight waist. His chest had depth and thickness, especially in the lower pecs where many bodybuilders went flat. His delt exploded from every angle with striations visible on the stage lights. His triceps hung like horseshoes, and his back flared into a roadmap of muscle separation. His quads showed cross striations that most men only dream about, and his legs matched his upper body in a way that was rare in the golden era bodybuilding scene. Frank Zane had aesthetics, but less mass. Mike Mentzer had mass, but harder lines. Chris Dickerson had grace, but lighter overall density. Tom Platz had legendary legs, but his upper body didn't match. Roy Callender had everything. That's not hype. That's what contest photos and expert opinions from that time period confirm. So why don't more people know his name? The answer lies in how he trained. Roy Callender didn't believe in shortcuts or trendy programs or quick fix methods. His training sessions became legendary because they lasted up to 5 hours. 5 hours of heavy, focused, relentless work. One workout could include more than 80 sets across 2 muscle groups, turning chest and back days into marathons. He'd start with heavy compound movements like bench presses, rows, and deadlifts, then move through multiple angles of isolation work. While other bodybuilders finished their workouts in 90 minutes, Roy was still pushing through his 40th set. He attacked every muscle from different positions, using flat benches and incline benches and decline benches for chest, then switching to cable work and dumbbell flies. His back training followed the same blueprint: wide grip pull-downs, closed grip rows, barbell rows, T-bar rows, pullovers. Nothing got overlooked. Nothing got half effort. This wasn't modern Instagram training where you post a few sets and leave. This was the kind of gym work that turned iron disciples into legends in the 1970s and early 1980s. The gyms Roy trained in smelled like chalk, dust, and sweat. Plates clanged against each other. Fans rattled in corners because air conditioning barely existed. Mirrors were cracked. Equipment was old but functional. And serious men showed up every single day to chase something they could barely define, a physique that would separate them from everyone else. Roy Callender lived in that world. He breathed it. His work ethic became the standard that younger bodybuilders measured themselves against. Guys would watch him train and shake their heads. Nobody trained that long. Nobody pushed that hard. Nobody stayed that consistent year after year without burning out. But Roy never burned out. He just kept building. Every session added another layer of density. Every month revealed more separation. Every year brought him closer to what everyone agreed was a near-perfect physique. By 1978, Roy Callender walked into the biggest competition of his life, the Mr. Olympia. This was the contest that crowned bodybuilding's king. Frank Zane had won the year before with his vacuum waist and classical lines. The sport was shifting. Size was starting to matter more. Conditioning was becoming the tiebreaker. And Roy showed up looking like the future of bodybuilding. Thick, balanced, shredded, and powerful. The Mr. Olympia had just introduced a heavyweight and lightweight division that year. Roy competed in the heavyweight class and placed second. Then in the overall comparison against the lightweight winner, he finished third. Third place at the Mr. Olympia. That should have launched him into superstar territory. Contest promoters should have been building shows around him. Magazine covers should have followed. Supplement companies should have signed him to endorsement deals. But none of that happened the way it should have. Roy Callender kept competing at the highest level, racking up wins and top placings that most bodybuilders would retire happy with. In 1979, he won the Grand Prix Vancouver, claimed the World Pro Championships title, and took home the Canada Diamond Pro Cup, a contest offering a $25,000 diamond prize where he beat returning legend Larry Scott. At the 1979 Mr. Olympia, he placed fourth in the heavyweight division. In 1980, he competed at Night of Champions in Grand Prix, Pennsylvania, finishing third at both. Then came the 1980 Mr. Olympia in Sydney, Australia, one of the most controversial contests in bodybuilding history. Arnold Schwarzenegger made a surprise comeback after 5 years away from competition. The judging turned chaotic. Fans argued for weeks afterward about who really deserved what placing. Official records show Roy Callender finishing seventh, but later reports revealed he actually tied for sixth with Roger Walker and lost a two-man pose down that determined who advanced. The entire contest became a symbol of everything frustrating about golden era judging: inconsistent criteria, shifting standards, and results that left the audience confused. Roy continued pushing through 1981 with second and third place finishes at multiple Grand Prix events, then placed fourth at that year's Mr. Olympia. He won pro shows. He placed in the top 5 at Olympia contests. He beat Hall of Fame legends in head-to-head matchups. Yet when bodybuilding fans listed the greats of the golden era, his name kept getting left off. Promoters talked about Zane's aesthetics and Mentzer's intensity, and Dickerson's elegance and Platz's legs. Roy Callender just kept showing up, looking incredible, and walking away without the recognition his physique had earned. Something was wrong. Not with his body, not with his training, not with his dedication. The problem lived somewhere else, in the system itself, in the way the sport decided who became a legend and who became a footnote. And that brings us to the moment that explains everything. Here's the truth nobody wanted to say out loud during Roy Callender's competitive years. His near-perfect physique wasn't the problem. The era betrayed him. Golden era bodybuilding went through a massive identity crisis during Roy's prime. In the late 1970s, judges favored the streamlined, classical look that Frank Zane represented: vacuum waist, flowing lines, aesthetic balance over pure size. Then, by the early 1980s, the sport started shifting toward mass. Lee Haney's era was coming. Bigger physiques were winning. The standards changed year to year, sometimes contest to contest. And Roy Callender sat directly in the middle. He carried more muscle than Zane and Dickerson, making him too big for the aesthetic crown. But he maintained more balanced proportion than the pure mass guys, making him too refined for the size-focused judges. In any other era, that middle position would have been perfect. During his competitive years, it became a career-killing trap. For a champion to rise in bodybuilding, he must be placed inside a story. Frank Zane was the thinking man's Mr. Olympia, who proved you could win with brains and aesthetics. Mike Mentzer was the hit revolutionary, who trained less but more intensely than anyone. Chris Dickerson was the graceful veteran, who finally won his Olympia at age 43. Tom Platz was the quad maestro, whose leg development redefined what was possible. Every legend got a narrative that fans could repeat, that magazines could sell, that sponsors could market. Roy Callender never got one. He was just extremely good everywhere. Dense chest, detailed back, powerful shoulders, balanced legs, tight waist, crisp conditioning. There was no single hook, no dramatic story, no marketing angle that separated him from the pack in a way promoters knew how to sell. So despite beating many of these same champions in various contests, despite standing on stage looking as complete as anyone, he became the man without a narrative, not marketed as the aesthetic king, not promoted as the mass threat, just consistently excellent and consistently overlooked. The second part of what robbed Roy Callender was timing. His absolute best shape arrived between 1978 and 1981, right when the IFBB judging criteria were most unstable and confusing. One year, judges wanted flow and taper. The next year, they wanted thickness and density. The year after that, conditioning became the deciding factor. Nobody could predict what would win. Even champions from that era admit the standards felt random. Roy kept showing up in peak condition, but the goalposts kept moving. By the time the sport settled into clearer criteria in the mid-1980s with Lee Haney's dominance, Roy's competitive prime had already passed. The momentum had shifted to younger names. The media attention had moved on, and Roy Callender's window closed before the sport ever gave him a fair, consistent lane to victory. There's also the factor nobody wants to discuss directly, but everyone from that era understands: geography and promotional politics mattered. Roy was Barbadian by birth, British by early training, and Canadian by competition residence. In an IFBB landscape dominated by American media, American magazines, and American promotional priorities, he wasn't the default choice for cover features and sponsorship deals. He got coverage in muscle and fitness. He appeared in contest reports, but he never became the front and center poster athlete that the sport built entire marketing campaigns around. This wasn't explicit discrimination. It was subtler than that. It was who got the extra push, who got profiled in multi-page spreads, who got invited to guest pose at the biggest shows, who supplement companies decided to sign as their faces. Those opportunities created momentum that translated into fan recognition, which translated into legend status. Roy kept getting passed over for reasons that had nothing to do with his physique and everything to do with forces outside his control. Over and over, Roy Callender walked on stage looking complete and walked off stage wondering what he'd done wrong. He couldn't add more muscle without losing his balance. He couldn't get more condition without looking flat. He couldn't change his structure or his genetics or his training response. All he could control was effort, and he gave maximum effort every single time. Yet contest after contest, the results felt random. A third place here, a fourth place there. Occasionally a win at a Grand Prix event, but never the Olympia title, never the sustained recognition, never the legend status that his mirror reflection and his contest photos clearly warranted. Fans who watched him compete remember the frustration. You'd see Roy stand next to the winner and think, how did they score it that way? The answer was never clear. The explanations never made sense. And slowly, quietly, Roy Callender's name started fading from the conversation, even while he was still competing. By 1982, newer stars were rising and Roy's placing started slipping. He placed fifth at the World Pro Championships that year. He continued competing through 1984 with a fifth-place finish at the Mr. Olympia. Then he took time away and returned for a final run in 1987, competing at the Grand Prix Germany, Night of Champions, and World Pro Championships before retiring permanently. He was 43 years old. He'd been competing at the professional level for a decade. He'd won major titles. He'd placed in the Olympia top 5 multiple times. He'd beaten Hall of Fame legends in head-to-head matchups. And when he walked away from competitive bodybuilding, the sport barely noticed. No retirement tour. No special tributes. No media celebrating his contributions. He just faded into background like hundreds of other competitors who never quite reached the top of the mountain. Most bodybuilders in that position would have disappeared entirely. Roy Callender didn't. He moved back to Barbados for a period, then returned to Montreal, where he built a competitive base. He started training clients. He stayed in the gym. He kept lifting heavy even as the years passed. And he waited, not for recognition, not for validation, just because the iron had been part of his life since he was 8 years old, and walking away completely wasn't an option. The sport moved on without him. The 1990s brought mass monsters like Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman, who made the golden era physiques look small by comparison. The 2000s brought internet forums where fans argued about who was truly great. And slowly, quietly, something started happening. People began rediscovering Roy Callender's photos. Digital archives started surfacing old contest footage and magazine spreads from the late 70s and early 80s. Fans who were too young to have seen Roy compete in person stumbled across his images online. And the reaction was always the same. Shock. Pure shock that this physique didn't win multiple Olympia titles. Modern viewers couldn't understand how judges looked at Roy Callender standing next to champions and scored him third or fourth or fifth. The density looked Olympia level. The balance looked Olympia level. The conditioning looked Olympia level. Everything about his physique screamed champion. Yet the record books showed something different. YouTube bodybuilding historians started making videos about underrated legends, and Roy's name kept appearing. Generation Iron called him the Rodney Dangerfield of pro bodybuilding. The man who got no respect despite clearly deserving it. Fitness forums debated whether he was the most underrated bodybuilder of the golden era, and the consensus kept landing in the same place. Yes, Roy Callender was robbed. In 2008, the IFBB finally inducted Roy Callender into its Hall of Fame. 21 years after his retirement, the recognition came. Late, but it came. And for Roy, that mattered. He attended the ceremony. He accepted the honor. He thanked the people who supported him. But by then, entire generations of bodybuilding fans had grown up never hearing his name mentioned alongside the legends he competed against. The Hall of Fame plaque couldn't erase that. It couldn't rewrite history. It couldn't change the fact that when most people list golden era greats, they still forget Roy Callender. The sport acknowledged him formally while continuing to overlook him culturally. That gap between official recognition and actual legend status, that's what being robbed looks like in bodybuilding. Today, Roy Callender is in his late 70s and still training. His social media shows him squatting heavy weight, coaching clients, posting motivational messages about longevity and strength. He never stopped loving the iron. He never stopped believing in hard work. And he never became bitter about the career that should have made him a household name, but didn't. That quiet dignity is part why the fans who do know his story respect him so deeply. He could have spent decades complaining about controversial placings and political judging and missed opportunities. Instead, he kept training. He kept teaching. He kept living the principles that built his physique in the first place. The sport may have robbed him of legend status, but it couldn't rob him of self-respect or purpose. So, why should you care about Roy Callender in 2024? Because his story reveals something essential about how legends are made. Talent isn't enough. Hard work isn't enough. Even a near-perfect physique isn't enough. You need timing. You need narrative. You need promotional support. You need to fit the exact criteria judges are looking for in the exact year you peak. Roy Callender had everything except those final pieces. He entered a sport ready to crown him champion, but the spotlight never turned fully toward him. The judging criteria kept shifting. The marketing priorities favored other names. And gradually, inevitably, he became a forgotten man with the unforgettable physique. Modern fans discovering his photos represent a second chance at the recognition he deserved the first time. It's too late to change the contest results. But it's not too late to say his name when we talk about golden era greatness. The classic physique division in modern bodybuilding looks almost exactly like Roy Callender's build. That balanced, dense, aesthetically complete look he brought to stages in 1978. That's what today's classic physique competitors are chasing. The sport finally created a category for physique type that Roy perfected decades ago. Except he competed when that category didn't exist, when judges couldn't decide if they wanted aesthetics or mass, when the criteria changed year to year. If Roy Callender competed today in classic physique, he'd be a favorite at every contest. But in his era, he was a man trapped between two worlds, too muscular for the aesthetic division, too aesthetic for the mass division. In a lineup of giants and artists, Roy Callender was the perfect middle, and perfect didn't win. That's the tragedy modern fans are finally understanding when they discover his photos. Everything about his physique says champion. The thickness, the balance, the conditioning, the proportions, the detail, it all screams legend. But the record books tell a different story. Third at the Olympia once, fourth twice, multiple Grand Prix wins, pro titles, Hall of Fame induction decades later, and then silence. His name doesn't come up in casual bodybuilding conversations the way Zane and Mentzer and Dickerson do. Documentaries about the golden era skip over him or mention him in passing. New fans watch old Olympia footage and ask, who is that guy? And experienced fans have to explain that he was one of the best who never quite got his moment. That explanation always feels inadequate. Because how do you capture what it means to look like a champion, train like a champion, compete like a champion, and still somehow not become the legend your physique earned? You can't understand golden era bodybuilding without understanding what happened to Roy Callender. His career exposes every flaw in how the sport created legends during its most famous period. The inconsistent judging, the promotional politics, the narrative requirements, the geographic biases, the timing luck, all of it converged to rob a near-perfect physique of the recognition it deserved. And the most frustrating part? Roy did everything right. He trained harder than almost anyone. He brought his best shape repeatedly. He won when given the chance. He never made excuses. He never quit. He never complained publicly about the system that kept passing him over. He just kept showing up, kept competing, and kept hoping the next contest would be the one where everything finally aligned. It never did. Not in the way that creates legends. Not in the way that puts your name in permanent conversation alongside the greats. Roy Callender proved that a perfect physique isn't always enough. Not when the era refuses to see it. The judges looked at him and saw a good bodybuilder instead of a great one. The magazines featured him but never made him the story. The promoters booked him but never built shows around him. And slowly, inevitably, his competitive window closed. By the time people started recognizing what they'd missed, he'd already retired. By the time the Hall of Fame inducted him, his prime was decades behind him. By the time younger fans discovered his photos online, most assumed he must have won multiple Olympias. The disconnect between what his physique looked like and what his career achievements were, that gap is where the robbery happened. Not in a single contest, not in one controversial placing, but across an entire decade of being consistently excellent and consistently overlooked. The lesson isn't that Roy Callender failed. The lesson is that bodybuilding failed Roy Callender. The sport had a champion caliber physique competing at the highest level for years, and it never gave him the platform his talent warranted. That failure belongs to the judges who couldn't settle on consistent criteria, to the magazines that chose other athletes for cover features, to the promoters who built their marketing around different names, to the entire system that decides who becomes immortal and who becomes forgotten. Roy Callender deserved better. His physique earned better. His work ethic demanded better. but in golden era bodybuilding, deserving something and receiving it were two completely different things. And Roy learned that lesson more painfully than almost anyone else from his generation. If you've never heard of Roy Callender before today, you're not alone. Most bodybuilding fans haven't. That's the point. That's the robbery. A man who looked like he should be on every greatest physiques ever list instead exists as a footnote most people skip over. But now you know. Now you've seen what the sport overlooked. Now you understand why modern fans discover his photos keep asking the same question. How did this guy not win everything? The answer is complicated and frustrating and reveals uncomfortable truths about how legends are made. Roy Callender had the body. He had the work ethic. He had the competitive spirit. What he didn't have was timing, narrative, and promotional luck. And in golden era bodybuilding, those invisible factors mattered just as much as the visible physique.